Usually we speak on the Pasha of the week. This week, we don't read the Pasha of the week this Shabbos. Shabbos is Rosh Hashanah. And the Pasha's Haazinu, we will first read the next Shabbos. So we will deviate from our standard and we'll speak about Rosh Hashanah, which I think is not a bad decision, not a wrong decision. I would like to see whether we can focus in and understand the principles of Rosh Hashanah. What it means in general and what it means specifically to each one of us. How do we relate to it? How do we capture this principle? And what can we expect as a result of this effort from ourselves? Because every human effort has the ability to have a long-term benefit, not just for the moment, a long-term benefit. Sometimes we don't realize it, but it is there. Just we were talking about climbing up a hill. When you make an effort, you make a step up. So you think you just made one step up. It's not one step up. You're that much higher. And when you're that much higher, your line of vision expands, right? When you climb up a hill, your horizon rises. Everyone understands the words? Mm-hmm. Yes? Horizon is the end of the world. Right? You see a bigger expanse. So, certainly preparation for Rosh Hashanah, which has very wide ramifications, very general principles. And we're all hoping that the Rosh Hashanah should be the new year in general for the whole world and for Am Yisrael and for each one of us. We should be able to start with a new impetus, with new view, new strength. I'm assuming that you learned about it. So some terms I will explain, some terms I will not explain. If you don't understand something, please stop me. The reason I will not explain because I want to just covered some ground. But if needed, I'll explain anything that needs to be explained. Rosh Hashanah is described as the day that we coronate Hashem as King. The Gemara says that Hashem says to us, the Jewish people, that when you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, you are declaring me as your king. Tamlichuni aleichem. And in the prayer of Rosh Hashanah, davening of Rosh Hashanah, the Shemoneh Esrei, the Musaf davening of Rosh Hashanah is the longest of the entire year. And what does it consist of? It consists of three sections. One is Malchiyos, Zichronos, and Shoifros, when we mention the principle that Hashem is King, and Zichronos, that Hashem remembers, and everything in the world from the beginning of time is always fresh, and everything is there in reality. And Shoifros, to remember how Hashem responds to Tkiyas Shofar, to the blowing of the shofar. Like Haazinu, there was shofar, and all kinds of different things. We describe it in our words, and also we mention psukim. We're supposed to say psukim. We say 10 psukim in each one. I'll try to touch on each one of these 3 principles, particularly on malchios and shofaris. What is the meaning of malchios, or malchus? Hashem is king. What does that really mean? We know that Hashem created the world. Everybody understands that. Even though the world continues on to be from day to day, nothing changes, it seems to be running on its own. But any person with the right mind understands that the world did not come into being on its own. And then furthermore, those of us, Baruch Hashem, that we merited to have exposure to Pnimis Ateret, to learn Chassidus. We all learned in Tanya that this creation that Hashem created the world was not a one-time creation, that He created it 5,500 years ago, of 570 years ago, but that He creates it all the time. Because the world cannot last one instant on its own. There's no reality to it. It has to be maintained all the time. That we all understand. And therefore, since the world is a creation, we understand as a result of that it is not no man's land. It's not what's called hefker. It's not without a plan. Just like a human being. A human being has a certain structure. It's a head, a heart, hands and feet, and he has a whole system of digestive system and all that. If he abuses any of that system, he uses the wrong way. He feeds himself the wrong food. He feeds himself good food, but overfeeds himself. Anything that he goes outside of the proper way, what happens? He hurts himself. Stop. What? Nagruska. Whether it's overfeeding himself, or over excessing himself, or over resting himself. A person does not, he rests, he loses strength, his muscles become flabby, and his heart stops to work properly. There's a certain system in the human being, and one has to maintain that system, stay within that system properly. Otherwise, it's not going to work. If this is true regarding this small world of the human world, this is equally true and much more so in the general world, in the big world. So we all understand that. Things in the world have to be used appropriately, the way they meant, in a proper way, in a constructive way. In a constructive way. No one has the right to destroy anything in the world just for the sake of destruction. No one has the right. Whether it's a Yid or Lahav Lagoy. This is known as the 7 principles, 7 mitzvahs that were given, Bnei Noach, general principles that Hashem gave to the world. No one is allowed to transgress on these 7 principles. Whether you recognize that Hashem is your king or you live in your own world. When you transgress on that, you're destroying your own world. and no one has the right to do that. That we understand. On top of that, or way beyond that, we have a completely different principle. Not just that Hashem created the world and the world needs sustenance, but that the world has a king. Where is the king coming? What is the significance of the king? The fact is that the nature of the world we see right away. If you abuse the nature of the world, you bring destruction. The king we don't see. How do you come to relate? What does it mean that there is a king in the world? And we are instrumental to declare Hashem as the king of the world. We are effective. We are effective in doing that. And we also know that this whole principle that we declare Hashem as king, whole principle of serving Hashem as the king of the world, this is something which came as a result of Matan Torah. Hashem gave us a Torah. This is what He gave us. When Hashem gave us a Torah, our entire perspective on life changed. In what way? Prior to that, our perspective on life was not to be destructive to the world, to live according to the healthy nature of the world. And Matan Torah, what became our focus in life? What became the central focus of our life, defining what is a Yid, what is our life about? A totally new concept. Serving the King of the world, serving Hashem. What does that mean? What kind of service can we offer the Creator of the world? And how do we relate to this thing, the whole concept? What is it? How do we serve it? The principle behind this is as follows. Indeed, Hashem created a huge and a very rich world. A world which is unimaginable in the human mind. We cannot fathom the wealth and richness and the royalty and the glory that exists in the world. We cannot begin to surmise it. It is truly a representation of a godly mind. Despite that fact, if the world should be viewed as the world itself, just from the perspective as the world itself, as huge and versatile as it is, it has absolutely no value, no significance. It's an amazing thing. You know that the world was created in 6 days and 7 days Shabbos. Of the 6 days, 5.5 days were the days that the world, this glorious world, was created. The heaven and earth, and all in between them, the vegetation, the fowl, birds. You know what's going on in the fowl? You know how many species there are in the fowl? How many species there are in the vegetation? Unlimited. And then the fish. Unlimited. And then there is the land animals. All that was created in 5.5 days. And we had already this complete, beautiful world. And what was the world, the value of the world at that time? Yeah. Imagine our world without a human being. What's the value of the world? What does the world stand for? But I want you to also reflect, not just in general. Everything in the world serves a purpose. Vegetation, it's inevitable. Everything lives on vegetation. Every animal has to have, one way or another, they're dependent on vegetation. If a lion eats a sheep, how did the sheep grow up? By eating grass. Nothing happens without vegetation. And then you have the entire cycle of the world. Everything supports everything else. And the world runs, so to speak, a complete cycle. And it's glorious. And yet we all realize, despite this whole cycle, and this whole huge development, it is totally insignificant and meaningless and valueless. Came man, was created on the second half of the 6th day. All of a sudden, boom, there's a real world. What's so real about the world? What did man contribute to the world? Man is not a contributor to the world. He's a user of the world. He doesn't contribute anything. He eats vegetation, he eats all the animals, but he's not feed for anyone. What is man? How does man contribute to the world?
By serving Hashem.
Yeah, he sinned it.
No, wait a second. What's so significant about man? And the significance is so sharp. I will say that prior to man's coming, there was no significance at all to the world. When man came, the whole thing became fully significant. What did man bring to the world that wasn't there before? I mentioned in the past, in the class we learned it, what the Rambam brings down, what it says in the Medrash about the path that Avraham Avinu went through until he became Avraham Avinu. Because you know that Avraham Avinu was born into an idolatrous home, an idolatrous society. Completely Avodah Zarah. Nothing else there. And he came up at a certain stage in life declaring all this is false and this is valueless. There is something new, something else. Yes, sir.
That was when he was very, very young, 3 years old. He was barely an infant, barely a little child. He came to this realization.
Well, let me explain to you what happened. So there is a medrash that says that Avram was 3 years old when he recognized God. There's another mention that he was 40 years old. Another mention that he was 48 years old. What are all these different periods? These different periods represent different stages. And it can be said, so to speak, in a brief, that at age 3, Avram realized there is something missing in what he is being told. It couldn't be that the world exists just on these idols. Doesn't make sense. Like Mother says that Avram Avinu one time broke all the idols in his father's home. And his father came home and he became very angry. Why did you break the idols? He says, I didn't break it. This idol broke the other idol. So his father said, what? This idol can't even move. I said, it can move, so why are you worshipping it for? In other words, this was just a process. I want to think, what's going on? Doesn't make sense. So he eliminated idols very, very early on. Very early on. This is total garbage. But then, what is it? What is here? So he started looking into his mind, looking into his heart, and looking at the world. He saw the world. The world is really a beautiful world. And it really operates and works beautifully. So he started saying, the sun, the source of all energy, the source of all life, the sun must be the source of the world, the source of all strength and all power of the world. And then, as he was delving deeper into it and trying to make reality out of this, he came to the conclusion it couldn't be the sun, because as real the sun is, it is not always there. It sets at night. It changes. Anything that changes cannot be the source of the whole world. The world is something which goes through changes. Anything that changes cannot be the base of the world. And this way, Avraham Avinu went through years and years, decades of negating. Negating means rejecting possibilities. He went through everything, all the possibilities as this cannot be, this cannot be, this cannot be. This is a real process. This was not just a 1, 2, 3 thing. He had to convince himself, he had to see in his heart and mind what he recognizes, what truth he recognizes in the world, and where is it coming from. Until he came to the following recognition. This is the important thing. Avraham came to recognition, so to speak, the revolutionary recognition that Avraham came to was that the real source and the management of the world is outside of the world. It's not even in part of the world at all. It's something comes from outside of the world. It's greater than the world. You don't find it in the world. You can't identify it. It's not the sun, the moon, or all or whole cosmos together. It's something that's completely outside and completely supreme and beyond world. It's not worldly at all. Because anything worldly has to be created, has to be supported. This is a truth that does not have to be supported and doesn't have to be created. When Avram came to this realization, this was not an independent realization. Please understand what I mean by independent. An independent realization means I have a world and I have a creator. Yes, the creator is outside and bigger than the world. But the world is still the same world. But there is a creator outside of the world. Avram realized that that is not the case. That in fact, what he is observing in the world itself, the definition of world and the entire interpretation of his observation of the world itself completely changed. Whereas before, he saw that this is, as we said before, a glorious and beautiful world. And he thought, wow, what a world. Now he came to realize that the world has no glory of its own. And the reason that the world looks so glorious and beautiful is because it represents the Creator. It is the glory and beauty of the world, of the Creator that the world represents, not the world itself. The world itself is a meaningless blob of matter. His whole view of the world changed. And as a result, the creator of the world became his reality, not as something that supports the world, but this became the reality. So when he sees the beautiful world, what is he seeing? He's seeing the creator through the world. But the world itself, meaningless. There was a time in the 60s, 1960s, this was identified as the glorious 60s. There was President Kennedy in those years. He was a youthful, very insightful person, and he said, the glorious 60s. In these 60s, we are going to land a man on the moon. In those years, this was significant because there was always this rivalry, the competition between America and Russia, and it meant a lot to overtake the Russians, not to let them get ahead. It was a tragedy in the world when the Russians were the first one to send up a Sputnik, a man into space. It was a tragedy in the world. And that's when America set to work, and they overtook the Russians in no time. So he says, we're going to land a man on the moon. I think he said 1969, I don't remember the year. He died in 1963. He was killed. But it was set in motion, we're going to land a man on the moon. And in those days, this was really a very fantastic thought. So people came up with all kinds of opinions. Should we not? Can we not? And somebody asked the Rebbe about it. What does the Rebbe think about this whole phenomenon that human beings are expanding themselves into the heavens. They want to land the man into the moon. Is it okay? Is that contrary to Torah principles? Hashomayim shomayim la'Hashem ha'oretz nosan livnei yodam. So where does man come to fly up into the moon? So they asked the Rebbe about it. Is it appropriate? The Rebbe said, there's nothing in the Torah against human beings investigating anything they want in the world. Want to fly to the moon? Be my guest. Go ahead. What the Rebbe said, I want you to know. You'll be disappointed what you find there. You get the point? You're going to chase your tail into the moon. You think you will hit a new horizon, a new height. You come to the moon. You'll be totally disappointed because it will not make any change. It will not mean anything. It'll be totally insignificant. And what you find on the moon, nothing. This is true regarding the chase to the moon. And this is true regarding anything that happens in the world within the context of the world itself. The world has changed beyond recognition in the past 50 years. Completely. You can't recognize it. Has anything that was invented and brought into the world gave man a peace of mind, says, oh, now I have a real world. Now I have a real life. One thing. Nothing. Now we are playing with the internet. We have instantaneous connection with the entire world. Okay. So then what? What's next? You can sit by the internet and waste your time, and waste your days and weeks and months and years. But what is it? Do you find a new insight? Do you find a new truth? Do you find meaning in life? Do you find peace of mind? A human peace? Nothing. The world on its own truly has no significance. And this is what Avraham Avinu discovered. And this is what he taught the whole world. He says, you see this cycle, you see the sun rising in the morning and setting at night, and the moon rising and having its cycle. You know where that has come from? You know what that represents? That represents God's will. Take away God's will from that, and you have nothing. In our day, today, 4,000 years later, we have the following phenomenon. We have a phenomenon where people have studied the cosmos, studied the entire cycle of all the planets and the sun and the earth. And they came to the conclusion, scientifically, that this entire cycle is a physical, natural cycle. The sun does not mean to give light. The moon does not mean to create a monthly cycle. The sun doesn't mean to create a yearly cycle. This is all inadvertent. Inadvertent, unintended. Unintended, accidental. The earth tilts one way, nature tilts another way, and this is what happens. Which means that the entire cycle of life of the world, the seasons, the day and night and everything else, do not bear any significance. Now, when we human beings reflect on this view, what happens? We lose value for life. Nothing is happening. What's the difference? It's Monday, it's Tuesday, it's day, night. What's the difference? The whole world collapses when you start looking at the world entirely from a world perspective. In English, there's a word called implode. You know what implode means? You know what explode means? When implode means it falls inside. Explode means it breaks out, and implode means it falls inside. There's nothing there. When does the world acquire any value? Only when there is this recognition that this entire world is cycle. Not only the cycle, but everything that exists in the world. All that glory and all that beauty that we seem to be impressed by the world, it actually represents something which is outside of the world. Let's now talk a little bit about the principle of Malchus, kingdom, kingship, royalty. Now, a true illustration and experience of royalty we don't have today. But we can project, we can understand, we can talk about it. We can understand it from in relative to comparison. Let's say you have a teacher, and the teacher teaches you a certain concept, and you understand this concept. And you appreciate the fact that the teacher taught you this concept. And then, on the basis of that, you go and you set up your life on the basis of that principle. You act accordingly. Then you act according to what the teacher taught you. But the teacher is now outside of your life. You learned from him. And now you have this teaching, you know these principles, and you act according on these basic principles. No matter how much you appreciate the fact that the teacher taught it to you, he still remains outside of your life. You're following, you're acting according to what you know, what you understand. This is basically what's called the world cycle. Within the world, the context. You get information, or whatever principles, and then you act on it to yourself. Where you got that information is insignificant in terms of what you're doing with it. Then there's another concept. That's called the melech, a king. In the case of a king, the relationship is totally different. In the case of a king, if you are going to follow through on a request or on a decree, on the command of a king, you're not following the command because you learned about it and you're doing it because you agree, you think it's a good command, or you understand it. You do it because the king wants you to do that. That's the primary thing. You may understand it to somewhat, may not understand, may agree, may not agree. But even if you agree and you fully understand it, you still do it because the king told you to do it. What is the ultimate significance in this? This is the point which I would like you to understand. Like I said before, when you learn something and you follow through on what you learned, you are acting independently. You're acting on your own. Except you're acting on the basis and accordance to what you've learned from a teacher. In the case of a king, you're acting because the king said you should do it. This principle that you're acting because the king said you should do it, what does that do? How does that change your world? What this says is that your whole world is defined by the presence of the king. Not according to his mind, not according to his theory, according to his beliefs, according to his principles, but based on his presence. Like we said before, what does the world, the glory of the world represent? Not worldliness. It represents the fact that there is a king, that there is a God. It represents a godly presence. And if not for that true godly presence, then the world, with all its glory, falls apart. Loses completely its value and significance. So that when we say that we are coronating the king, we want to declare the Meibashn as king of the world, what does that mean? Does that mean that the Eibashter is now the boss and I better obey everything he says? It means something totally different. It means that the entire existence of the world is now viewed from the perspective of God's presence. That's all it is. Just like in the case of a king. This is what I've been pointed out before, that what Avraham Avinu discovered and realized is that the fact that the world appears to be so great and beautiful is false. It's not the world that you're looking at. It's not the world you're looking at, it's the Creator that you're looking at. And if you take the Creator out of your mind, then the same world will lose its value. On Rosh Hashanah, we coronate the king. On Rosh Hashanah, we accept Hashem's kingdom upon us. This means, in practical terms, that what defines the meaning and value of our own lives? What does it mean that I have accomplished something? What's the significance of any accomplishment? Did you ever hear a person say, "Oh, I've turned the world upside down and I don't see any value in it"? There was a man, I mentioned it before here, was the Rebbe mentioned in Fabrengen one time. There was a man, a very famous man, the wealthiest man in the whole world. The wealthiest man in the world in his days. His name was Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes?
Yeah. You heard of Howard Hughes? Howard Hughes was an engineer, a genius engineer. And there is a huge company called Hughes Motor Company. It produces airplanes, army airplanes, and helicopters, all kinds of complex machineries. And he was the wealthiest man in the world. The wealthiest. Along with that he was the wealthiest, he was also the most miserable man in the world. It's not a joke. It's a reality. Why was he so miserable? I mean, we saw it from his life, because he was constantly on the move. He was couldn't find himself. He was running from place to place. He never slept 2 nights in a row in the same place. Traveling by helicopter, and he always has an entourage, he was a multi-billionaire, He wouldn't trust anyone except around himself, except the few known people. What was the cause for his misery? He's such an accomplished, successful person. The cause for his misery was that he saw his worldly accomplishments exclusively only as such. He didn't see anything beyond it. And he thought, this is the real thing. And there is no way that a human being can find value in the world. There's no way. It doesn't have it. How can you find it? So what happens as a result of this Rosh Hashanah Avodah? And now I'll explain, I said I'll explain the term Avodas Hashem, Avodah, serve Hashem. To serve Hashem means I continue to live in the world. I do all the things in the world. I eat physical food. Kosher food, but it's physical food. I eat, I sleep, I take care of my bodily needs, and I take care of my spiritual needs, whatever, intellectual, emotional, whatever it is. Whatever it is that I do, whether it's physical or intellectual or spiritual or emotional, whatever it is, I recognize that the significant value of what I do is in the fact that this is in God's will. Not because it's a context, it's within the world, the context. This way, you're all the time in the godly presence. This sounds like fantastic, right? How can a human being really rise to that thing, to that level? It is very difficult to rise to that level on a constant basis, but it's not that difficult to understand that that's the truth. It's not difficult at all to understand that that's the truth. Because we all have gone through plenty of disappointments. I thought, if I get this, that's going to be, I get this, it's going to be. Nothing. Howard Hughes wasn't satisfied with his billions. It meant nothing to him. The world, and it as such, is beautiful, We're not discounting that at all. It is beautiful, it is glorious. But we have to reflect on what does that mean. What does that stand for? This is what we say in davening every day. That the heavens are, what are the heavens engaged in? What are they doing? They're praising Hashem. The glory in the world, the beauty in the world is in the statement that they say, this is a glorious world, this is a glorious God. They say this every day in davening. They say it in Haluk, it says, Halu is Hashem in Hashemayim, Halu kol tzvov, Halu Shemesh v'Yoreach. The Shemesh v'Yoreach praises God. Shemesh v'Yoreach. Shemesh is a ball of fire. The Yoreach, the Rebbe said, you come there, you'll be disappointed when you find it. How do they praise God? The answer is, we're not talking about the world definition of Shemesh and Yoreach. Talking about the Shemesh v'Yoreach as defined by God, what their place in the world is. That truly represents a godly praise. There's no question about it. The definition that God gave to the Shemesh and to the Yoreach, that's really praiseworthy. And the Shemesh is in constant recognition and presentation of this glory. So, in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, preparation, as we said, this is the day that we all come and we declare Hashem as the King. This has a meaning in the overall scheme of things, in terms of us being Jews, in terms of the world, and it has significance and ramifications in terms of us, every individual person. What are we declaring? We are declaring that without God there is no world. And that God's kingdom in the world, this is what makes the world into world. What does that mean for us personally? For every one of us to reflect on our own lives, reflect on our own activities, our own pursuits, our own interests. As much as we may be interested, swayed, drawn to various things in the world, we have to remind ourselves all the time that nothing in the world is worth pursuing without it being connected to some godly value, some true value. Go after, to go for it, to get it. And this is what happens at Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is when Adam Rishon was created. This is what Adam, that we asked originally, the whole world was finished. And Adam came, and what does he contribute to the world? Nothing. He contributes to the world its entire value, everything. When Adam came, everything came to life. Everything came to bloom and to true value. Before that, it had no value at all, no matter how big and glorious it is. What was the first thing that Adam Rishon did?
Ate an apple.
When you woke up, What was the first thing that he did when he woke up? He came out and he gathered all the animals and he said, let us go and praise the God our Creator. This is the human contribution to the world. This is what a human being stands for. This is what it means to be human. This is why the Jewish people are called Odom, because this is their contribution to the world. The Jewish people, we suffered untold suffering, unfathomable, unimaginable suffering over these thousands of years because of this message. Because of this message. Because we are constantly representing by our very life that the world is meaningless. And the world couldn't stand it. And they did everything trying to eliminate us because of this message. They declared the world is meaningless while declaring that there is meaning in the world, but it's coming from someplace else, not from the world itself. It's coming from a godly presence. And the godly presence in the world is a real presence. This is what makes it complete. This is like a melech, not like a teacher. You learn something and you go on your own. Only because the melech is there with you, and you do it because the melech is there. This is what gives the world meaning. If you do it on your own, it's lost. It's an interesting thing. The Rambam says about Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. And he says that a non-Jew, a goy, who fulfills the requirement of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach gets the title of Haazinu Israel. Haazinu Israel. Everybody heard these terms, right? Haazinu Israel, a chosid of a righteous amongst the nations, amongst the goyim. And the Rambam says more, that he has olam haba. This is beyond the manual. He has olam haba. That's because he fulfills the 7 mitzvahs. But then the Rabbi says there is one caveat, one condition, that he fulfills the 7 mitzvahs not because they make sense in the world, but because this is what Moshe Rabbeinu taught in the name of God in the time. Without that, you don't have it. The whole principle of recognizing that the world is a non-entity without God is the meaning of Avodas Hashem. And then, as a result, everything you do, you pursue your own interest. You keep your health. Like the Rambam says, to keep a person's health is Mdarkei Hashem. A person has to be healthy. A person has to be healthy physically and spiritually. A person has to be joyous all the time. His joy represents the fact that there is a real meaning in life, a real God, a real world. And it's Avodas Hashem in everything that a person does. Because everything that a person does, he inevitably shows that there is a real world, that there is a real God, a real Melech in the world. So now that we are mamish, so to speak, on the threshold of the new year, ahead of Rosh Hashanah, we should, with Hashem's help, clear our own minds and have a clear view what it means to come Rosh Hashanah before the king, and recognize this is not fantastic terms. This is not imagination. This is something which we individuals, each one according to our own level, according to our own level of intelligence, can truly relate to. This is real. I'm sorry I have to cut you off. This is real. Everyone has a means of relating to it at one level or another. And if we do, that can very well change our whole life. Bring new spirit and new strength, new resolve into the new year.
Resolution.
And certainly, this is the means by which we receive Hashem's brachas. Each one here each one of us, Klal Yisrael, should have Hashem's brachas for tremendous success in everything. And like the Rebbe says, the biggest bracha of all, we should all be zoifer to participate and to see the Gilui Shleima in Mashiach. Speeding nowadays.
Amen.
Amen.